Rams Talk Radio is a proud member of the Blue Wire Network.
Whose house? Whose house? Under pressure. Donald got there in the air. Intercepted by the Rams.
Los Angeles Rams selectors, Jared Verse.
Get out of your seat and rise with the Devontae, touchdown! What a play! Ciapala, diving grab! President Tua! Stafford, Cobb, what a catch! Cooper Kupp turns on the Jets. Kupp racing away. Cooper Kupp all the way. Touchdown!
Even on one play at a time, believe it, and you'll be world champions.
A Lombardi trophy for Los Angeles.
We're world champions. Yes, sir. We're world champions. You make that play. We're world champions. You make that play. Let's go.
Welcome to Rams Talk Radio. This is Derek Ciapala, back with another edition of the Tour Around the League. It is one of my favorite parts of the year because it just gives me time to get to know everybody else across the league and see what they're thinking, where they're going. We record these just so you know, the last time we go through this, they're one of this season. What we normally do is we record these right after the draft. We take a month or so just to record them and get them ready for you guys. We get a view of how that team is doing from that podcaster's point of view. We get a look at their transactions, how they feel about the draft, all that jazz, all the newsworthy stuff. And then we get them into the series for you so you're familiar with each team as we head into the new season. Do I successfully get all 32 teams every year? No, because life happens, but I do the best I can. And this year, of course, we're doing a podcast apiece for each of the NFC West opponents, including today's guest, Rob Lowder from the Striking Gold podcast, covering the 49ers, our arch rivals, the perennial measuring stick for what we do here as fans of the Los Angeles Rams and those who watch the sport. We always know this is the rivalry. It is one of the best rivalries in the NFL. If you think I'm wrong, okay. Seriously, what rivalry can you talk about on the West Coast that's better than the Rams and 49ers? There aren't many. So, without further ado, here's Rob Lowder from Striking Gold. Let's take a look at where he thinks they are. Welcome in, Rob Lowder from the Striking Gold podcast here on Blue Wire, one of our partner affiliate here on the network. I mean, it's hard. And when you say partner in your Rams and Niners podcast, it's a little awkward.
Yeah, we'll get past it. We'll get past it.
So it was an interesting year in the NFC West, one of the toughest divisions in the league. And all three teams at the top here go in the offseason with stuff to prove in terms of can Seattle try and keep the team together to try and run for a repeat? Can the Rams actually take the next step? Can the Niners fix a couple gaps there and take the next step as well? Overall, when you're looking at this offseason for you guys, Rob, how you feeling?
Pretty good. I think they did all right. They weren't, the last offseason, not this offseason, the last offseason, the team caught a lot of flack for just kind of like their inactivity. The writing was on the wall. You could read the tea leaves that the team was looking to kind of shed some unwanted contracts, eat some dead money, and then they weren't very active in free agency. That was last offseason. The only thing they were last offseason was they signed a ton of their own players. They re-signed George Kittle. They re-signed Fred Warner. They re-signed Brock Purdy. And they did that, and that's a lot of money to throw around in an offseason. So it seemed like a lot of people forgot about that. This offseason, they did a lot more. Obviously, Mike Evans is at the front of that, and he's on the twilight of his career, but for the most part can still be a weapon that Brock Purdy's never had, in that sense, in one of the better man beaters in the league. They made that trade, trading a third rounder to Dallas for Osa Odigizua, which is right what they needed. Somebody along the interior of the defensive line that can make something happen, and the 49ers were like one of the worst pass rushes in all time last season, and that can happen when you lose your first round pick. That can happen in Michael Williams. That can happen when you lose Nick Bosa. And then it was a whole lot of dominoes falling in the wrong direction for the 49ers. But overall, at least on this side of the fence, from a coaching standpoint, last year was kind of like, given what he had on the roster, kind of a masterclass for Kyle Shanahan and what he was able to get out of that team and what Brock Purdy was still able to do. And this offseason I think it kind of proved to them last season that, look, you took the last offseason off 2 off seasons ago, and maybe that kind of bit them a little bit in the fact that they were able to get into the playoffs and they were able to win in the first round of the playoffs despite a depleted roster. And maybe if they had a couple more pieces that they would have invested in, things would have gone a little differently. Now, they were so injury depleted that I think that season kind of just had to end where it ended anyways. But this offseason, they did a lot. And I feel like they're in a much, much better spot to just be competitive. They also added Christian Kirk, which just kind of rounds out the receiving core. And then you add the draft picks and Deshaun Stribling. A couple of their draft picks were on the offensive line. They're going to have a decent competition there at left guard. They took a Grayson Halton in the 4th round. They got Romello Height in the 2nd round, they were basically all about the pass rush and the receivers in this draft class for the most part, at least where it's going to matter. So it was a much more productive offseason for the 49ers, and I feel like they're going into the season, as long as they can stay healthy, which is the question that you're always saying in regards to the 49ers. They should have a very solid competitive team again.
They do have a schedule advantage, as we saw with compared to what the Rams have, for example, where the Rams have their big gauntlet going from November 25th on. Does have an advantage there. But the big thing I'm kind of wondering, I mean, you just mentioned it, and it seems like this is the case every single year when it comes to the Niners. Sometimes it's not about talent, sometimes it's about what is going on with that roster, in particular injuries. I have to ask about, I mean, it seems kind of a weird thing to ask about, like injuries. But this Niners team has had multiple seasons wrecked in the last several years.
Right.
Like, I'm talking a lot of, really possible championship runs kind of just derailed by injuries.
I mean, they were in the Super Bowl and they lost a player to an Achilles injury. So it's like, it sticks with them. I don't think there's, as much of a cop out as it is. I think it's just bad luck. I think it's just bad luck. I mean, even Fred Warner, who has been an absolute stalwart for health and availability, he got rolled up on and shattered his ankle. Like there's nothing you can do to avoid that. Now, on the flip side, you've got somebody like Nick Bosa, who's incredibly talented, but he just suffered his 3rd ACL. So at that point, that you are relying on players that are routinely hurt. Michael Williams, a rookie who's never been injured to that extent, tears his ACL on, I believe it was on the old MetLife turf, where that gets everybody these days. And you could go on. The 49ers kind of, they have a blend of incredibly bad luck and relying on players that have already shown that they can be susceptible to injury. And it's like, how much do you want to blame Christian McCaffrey for being injured from time to time, considering how much he's used? Like you go back and look at that dude's seasons, and historically, in terms of running backs, any running back that has ever been used like Christian McCaffrey was just used this last season has had a fall off the next year due to some type of injury. It's almost like a mathematics certainty how common it is. Kyle Madsen, he does Candlestick Chronicles podcast, also a Blue Wire, but he runs Niners Wire. He did an article about 6 months ago, maybe less, few months ago, that just, it was more about along the lines of 2 or 3 months ago, that just historically broke down every running back that's truly had a prolific season and how that just instantly falls off. It's so common. I think the only running back out of what seemed like a dozen or so to buck that trend was LaDainian Tomlinson. So point being, the 49ers have this weird combination of players that may be on the side of being more susceptible to injuries, but there's also so much of it that's just horrible luck. Like George Kittle's never had a major injury like that, and he's older. So, and that's another thing. If you look at the average age of rosters, I think the 49ers are at or near the top in terms of one of the oldest rosters in the NFL. So when you get into that, and they just signed Mike Evans, who usually misses at least a couple games a year, and he missed more than that last season. So there's just this weird balance of unquestionable bad luck and having players on your roster that just seem to struggle with injury. So it's not, I don't necessarily think there's anybody to blame. I certainly don't think it's the electrical substation. That's a little silly. But there's no question that since Kyle Shanahan took over, and that's been another part of the discussion, is how Kyle Shanahan practices and how intense his practices are. I've heard examples of them being not intense, and I've heard examples of them being more intense. So I don't really know where to go with that. But it's just some weird blend of luck and injury history, and just kind of the way it goes, man. I mean, every time they've been healthy, they've gone all the way down the line.
I'm wondering, I wasn't thinking about practices. I wasn't thinking about, luck, or I was wondering about the team's strength and conditioning program and their off-season conditioning program. Like, is there anything with that potentially has led to some of the problems they've had recently?
Nothing that's, like certifiable, you know what I mean? Nothing that you can like put a finger on.
Mm-hmm.
There's been talk of, they've had some turnover with the strength and conditioning staff. I don't remember his name, but an individual towards the top has been there since Kyle Shanahan has been there. So, and that's one of the things that a lot of fans have talked about is, if you cannot figure out why your injuries are so prevalent, why not, go for a different approach with the strength and conditioning staff, get new staff in there with a new outlook on things, with a new approach to training and warming up, wherever it comes from. And the 49ers have just seemed unwilling to do that. I don't know if they're a little stubborn about it. I don't know if they feel like, and they might have more detailed data than we have. You can be sure that they do. It just seems like they don't think it's as big of a deal as everybody else does. And I feel like everybody else is going, maybe you guys don't realize how often or how much you're injured, because it's way more than everybody else. And it sort of feels, by the way that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch talk about it, that they don't think it's that big of a deal. But everybody else is sitting here going like, hey man, something's got to change, because when you guys are healthy, you make it to the Super Bowl. And when you're not, it always feels like a season of what could have been,
I'm sitting here on the flip side, you're on here on the rival side going, man, I don't want that luck.
No.
You have a possible Super Bowl roster, and you're thinking, I want everything nice and clean, and all the health, all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed, to make sure these guys are healthy enough for that big run coming up this year. Whether if it can be, because if we lose Matt Stafford, it's pretty much done, right? So,
and then that's league wide, man. There's not really any team in the league that can lose their starter and make something of a season.
Well, even if you take a Kobe Turner off our line, or you take Puka, if he can get out of rehab, you take Puka off for a number of weeks, the offense completely changes when he's out.
Right.
Completely changes when he's out. So I would think that if one player, one of the quote skill position players, can impact your roster that way, that you'd want to make sure that your strength and conditioning program is consistently, at the cutting edge of what's going on.
Right.
So it's a little weird hearing that coming from you. Like, well, it's kind of, and I mean, this is what I'm hearing from you, is kind of sort of the same old.
Yeah, it does feel like they downplay it a little bit, and from this perspective, it feels like there's been enough consistent injury problems, and I don't have anything solid to reference right now, but I thought I remember seeing a report where the 49ers have more soft tissue, like hamstring pulls and stuff like that, like far and away the most out of any team. And when you think about something like that, that is almost squarely on the strength and conditioning department, and how they warm up and how they train and what they eat and, stuff like this. So there's things that are out of their control, but it doesn't really feel like the 49ers have necessarily addressed the things that, from my perspective, feel like they are in their control. It just feels like they're kind of like, well, injuries are a part of football is kind of the way they approach it. And you're like, well, maybe not so much in your case. It feels like more than that.
When you look at the makeup of this roster, you seem though pretty happy with what they did. When you're looking at the rest of the division, how are they stacking up right now, just from your point of view?
Well, I'm pretty enthusiastic and optimistic about what they did. But some gaps just can't be bridged in an offseason. I feel like the defensive front that the Seahawks put together, and even the Rams, they're no slouch. And I feel like the 49ers offensive line could be better. That's just not philosophically. Even the 49ers offensive line coach, Chris Forster, has said, like, I would rather this team invest high draft picks in players that either disrupt the ball or touch the ball. And, we can push offensive linemen towards the mid rounds and I'll be able to work with them, which is, that's a lot of confidence as a coach, but it just shows you that the 49ers don't really, really value offensive line. Now I can say that, and they have one of the best offensive linemen to ever play the game in Trent Williams, but, next to them, you've got a competition at left guard. Jake Brendel at center is, with the amount of things Kyle Shanahan asks a center to do, he's good at that, but physically he's just not quite there. Dominic Pooney is a promising draft pick, and Colt McKivitz has developed into just a solid right tackle, but it just feels like there's always one or two of those positions that just haven't quite been given the attention that you see other teams giving theirs around the league. And I feel like when it comes to the Seahawks, and maybe even the Rams a little bit, it's always, and this feels like a league-wide thing, like, think of the teams that win the Super Bowl. They always have an above average to dominant defensive front. And I don't feel like the 49ers have invested in their offensive line in a way that's going to be any sort of a rock to break that storm, to break the wave. So that's probably the biggest thing I say. When I think about those Seahawks games, now the 49ers were missing so many pieces and so many were hurt during the end of the season. And it's hard to look at those games and the fact that the 49ers only scored 9 points in 2 games against the Seahawks at the end of the season. So now at the same time, you got the Rams, and the Rams both times give the Seahawks everything they can handle, offensively. And maybe that has more to do with their playmakers than you do the offensive line. There's no way you can't rely on Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. Those are two of the best separators in the league. So, maybe the 49ers could look there, and maybe that's why they feel like they're better suited now. Another thing the 49ers had to deal with, one, Brandon Ayuk's off in La La Land. Deebo Samuel's not there anymore. Juwan Jennings was like their number one receiver. Ricky Pearsall's been great when he's on the field, but he struggles to stay on the field. And what you started to see there is Kyle Shanahan puts so much emphasis on perimeter run blocking. He will not put a receiver on the field that won't run block, that can't run block. And everybody on the field, Kendrick Bourne was out there too, just couldn't do it. And so anytime there was any amount of space created by the offensive line, it was usually immediately shut down by second-level defenders that were just never blocked. So Christian McCaffrey, whether he's lost a step or not, it doesn't really matter. The space was just never there. So that to me is the biggest gap the 49ers still have yet to fill is, you've got this talent. I think they're going to be much better on the perimeter and through the air, and they're going to have to do it without George Kittle in the beginning of the season. But how are you going to hold up against a Rams defensive front, against a Seahawks defensive front? And did your skill positions get good enough to move the ball like the Rams do? Because again, like, the difference between watching the 49ers play the Seahawks and the Rams play the Seahawks is like night and day. The Rams and Matthew Stafford helps. I mean, one of the best to just ever do it, but they just couldn't move the ball like that, and they just couldn't consistently move the ball down the field. And that's probably their biggest thing is, can you generate some sort of offense against what I still feel is going to be like a titan of a defense. And the Seahawks defense lost quite a bit. They lost one of their starting corners. They lost one of their starting defensive ends. But I still feel like they're going to be really, really good. Mike McDonald's just a great head coach. He's going to have them ready to go. And my biggest question is, have the 49ers done enough on the offensive side of the ball and along the offensive line to be able to be effective?
How does losing Robert Saleh again affect you?
Depends, I mean, he was just a fantastic coach. I didn't expect him to just immediately get picked back up like that. I did expect him to get a second chance, undoubtedly so. I didn't necessarily expect it to be after 1 year, But that just goes to show you, despite the injuries that the 49ers had, he was still able to produce and with having almost no pass rush, he was still able to produce a capable defense. He was still able to lead men, which is why you become a head coach, leader of men type thing. It's to be determined how much that's going to matter, because they filled that position with a capable defensive coordinator in Raheem Morris, who you guys know in LA very well. Now, at the same time, the thing I always back away from is everybody always wants to say, oh, well, he had a number one defense with the Rams. And I'm like, yeah, well, the Rams had number one type defense personnel too. So, and the 49ers have a ton of talent on defense. There's no question about that. Some of them are just coming back from injury, and I'm just not sure what to expect. I'm not sure what to expect. Maybe you've got some insight on Raheem Morris, but it's just an unknown right now. I like the fact that Raheem Morris is pretty versatile. He has a lot of looks. He does a lot of different things. He's ran a lot of different defenses, not necessarily a hard set 4-down or 4-man front guy or 3 to 5-man front guy. And so I'm just looking forward to seeing what he can do there. It certainly could be a lot worse in terms of the guys they've filled that position with in the past.
He was a frustrating guy. He's the defensive coordinator when we got the Super Bowl win, but yet there were times that his personnel packages and so on and so forth just were like, what are you doing? There were times when the pass rush disappeared. He played a lot. He played a lot of soft zone. That's something the Rams have done a lot over last 20 years. For
49ers do it a lot too.
And it drove us nuts, their unwillingness with him to be more aggressive. So, but yet they'd win games. And so it's hard to evaluate him because he was successful, but yet there were plenty of times when we were sitting there going, man, what are you doing? What are you doing? There's a large person in the Rams fan base that was like, man, fire this guy. But yet, Super Bowl. In
an impressive fashion too.
Yeah. So wow. It's hard to really kind of describe how to evaluate him. But if I can tell you that as a Ram guy, I'm much happier seeing him in San Francisco than I am, Robert Saleh. Like Robert Saleh drove me nuts, man. And in the most complimentary way for an opposing defensive coordinator. Like he just made things incredibly difficult. When he had his people there, this pass rush the way it needed to be, he was, he's a fantastic defensive coordinator, and I never like seeing the Rams face him. So I would just take Raheem Morris any day over that.
Well, the Rams made some great moves this offseason on the defensive side of the ball. Their secondary was just far and away probably the biggest positional weakness on the squad, and getting Jalen Watson and Trent McDuffie is just quite the upgrade. So I mean, I consider the Rams the best team in the NFL right now. They should be Super Bowl. I don't know odds wise if they're at the top. I think they should be. It's just the talent they've had. The talent they still have and the changes they've made on the defense should have a huge transition. So I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes.
You know what game I'm looking forward for the Rams? When
What's
they
that?
play the Chiefs.
Yeah.
And those two corners up against their old quarterback. I can't wait to see how that plays out.
Right.
It's just, So really quick, we're going to wrap this up here. Just want to know right now, when you look at that schedule that just got released, how are you feeling? What record do you feel comfortable just predicting right now for the Niners, and where would they place the division?
We just did that yesterday, as did most of the NFL. I think we were right around the 12-5 mark. I think I had them losing 2 to the Seahawks and splitting with the Rams, and who knows, with the weird Australia trip and what that's going to manifest itself like. Probably losing both to Seattle, splitting with the Rams, obviously beating the Cardinals both times. But there were still some other games in there that seem, the Chargers, that's going to be a good game. Even somebody like the Commanders and the Cowboys, like those two teams seem like they could take a dramatic swing in one direction. I think our prediction was about 12-5. But even then, the 49ers always find a way to drop one to a team where you're like, why did you lose to that team just now? That doesn't make sense. If you were to play that team 10 times, you beat them 9 times, like the old miracle quote. But I'm optimistic. They have a gauntlet just like the Rams do. So here, let me lay this out for you. They have their week 8 bye, and then they play the Raiders, which for the most part should be seen as relatively as a cupcake. Then they've got at Dallas. Who knows what you're going to get there? The 49ers have had the Dallas number for a while, but that can change at any point. And then they're going to Mexico to play the Vikings. Okay, so at Dallas, in Mexico playing the Vikings versus the Seahawks. Then they have to travel to New York to face the Giants, which is not necessarily a Giants thing, but it's more of a travel thing and a that field thing. Then they've got the Rams at home, the Chargers on the road, the Chiefs on the road, the Eagles at home, and then they finish with the Cardinals. So the 49ers have quite the gauntlet as well there towards the end of the year. Their rest differential wasn't as hugely negative as it has been in the past. It all kind of swung around to being net zero, but yeah, that back half of the season, the 49ers are going to need to pad some wins early because the back half of their season is going to be competitive, to say the least.
I don't know, Rob. When I look at that schedule, if you're saying you think 12 wins for the Niners, I think there's a good chance the Niners finish ahead of the Rams. If you look at the Rams run, the Rams start their playoffs start in week 12, home against the Packers, then the Chiefs, then at the Niners, home to the Cowboys, at the Seahawks, at Tampa, and finishing up with Seattle. It's
this very similar slate of games.
So then they have Denver, Philly, and Buffalo back to back to back. Weeks 3, 4, and 5 after facing the Niners in week 1. So I'm looking at that schedule going, holy moly! Like the Rams, in my view, if they get to the Super Bowl, they will have earned it because their playoffs start week 12, and it's essential for them and probably for the Niners too to, like you said, bank those wins earlier in the year, because if you can, then a couple of those late season games wind up being meaningless. And then,
so neither the 49ers or the Rams seem like they're going to have the luxury of losing to a team that they were supposed to beat or that they're favored against. There's so many tough games on both of their schedules. It's going to be a good one. And I was talking to my co-host Kyle Posey yesterday saying, and just based on what you were talking about right now, it's like maybe there is some value in, it's a hard slate of games, and obviously you got to win games to get into the playoffs, but maybe there's some value to stacking those good teams towards the end of the season, and the fact that you have to kind of go into a playoff mindset well before the playoffs are even there. You're already facing the teams that you might face again in the playoffs, and not to mention the fact that you're playing for positioning or the right to be there at all. So I think that for the Rams and the 49ers, they're both going to have to get it in gear well before the playoffs, just to make sure that they, you're already playing against possible playoff teams. So they're just going to have to make sure that everything's turned on and they're in the right mindset well before they're even in the game.
The Rams lost 2 games on the back end of the season last year to teams they had no business losing to. That was Carolina and Atlanta. And they can't do that this year. They have to go through that final stretch at their top of the game the entire way through. And if they do, it's a different, and again, I would say something similar for the Niners. Like, you just can't, at this point, you can't. Like,
Niners won 12 games last season and they were the 6th seed. You know what I mean? It's like,
and I'm looking at that schedule going, if the Rams do what they did last year, they could be 11-6 and might not even make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. Every year I'm like, man, they need to change the way they seed the playoffs. But it's going to be one. I haven't looked at the Seahawks schedule yet, but I know that at least for the 49ers and the Rams, that it's going to have to be locked up tight almost the entire season. The 49ers have a little bit of an easy stretch early. Week 2 Dolphins, week 3 Cardinals. But then they've got the Broncos and Seahawks back to back. So there really is nothing to be too comfortable with in the 49ers schedule.
I really wonder how the Rams got a tougher schedule than the Seahawks did, and the Seahawks are the first place schedule. Just how that happened. All right, Rob, let people know where they can find your work.
The Strike and Gold podcast on the Blue Wire Network. I used to do writing But I've kind of just consolidated everything on the podcast. We're also on YouTube now. We finally, after just years and years of people saying, "Hey, are you on YouTube? Are you on YouTube?" We finally did it just before the draft. So we got a brand new a YouTube channel at the Striking Gold podcast. So that's where you will find me.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I'm sure we'll catch up again in the season, probably before Melbourne.
Sounds good, man. I'm ready.
So are we. Have a great one.
See you, bud.
So the Niners are interesting to me. They were in every frame imaginable. They were the third best team in the division last year. They still managed to beat the Rams on Thursday Night Football, which blows my mind how they pulled that one off. The fact of the matter is no matter how much you love or hate the Niners, you want to acknowledge the fact that they are extremely good at what they do. And that means they're well coached by Kyle Shanahan. They are always going to be in the game. When they're not in the game, it's rare. They find ways to get around injuries. They find ways to get around problems in the roster. They just are well coached, and it shines even when they have personnel problems. They really, with all the turnover last season and all the drama and injuries for that matter, they had no business making the playoffs. They did. So they're going to be a problem, and we can't underestimate them. The Rams and Seahawks right now are favored by most to finish 1-2 in the division, however you want to flip it. You can't roll out the Niners. I can't say that enough. And we all know that, though. We know that. It's interesting to see how this rivalry just continues after year to be great. They're still the measuring stick, and now they're the measuring stick for both the Seahawks and the Rams. So credit to that organization as much as I want to hate to give it, but it's nice having an arch rival that continually pushes you to be better. That's all I got. I still think they're the third ranked team in the division, but it's going to be close. And a couple injuries here, a couple injuries there. There you go. All right. Hope you're enjoying the series. Follow us on YouTube at Rams Talk 5900. Follow us on X Talk Rams. Follow me at Ciapala. Until next time, we're out of here. Have a great one.